When the magic day finally comes for Nintendo to lift the lid on the Switch successor console, how will it choose to do so? Should we expect some random social media drop or a pre-scheduled release? Will we get the scantest of information, a name and photo with a couple of lines of info, or a full-on showcase of the Switch 2 in all its glory? Let's investigate. First of all, let's talk about what Nintendo is trying to achieve. They want to have the maximum impact for their release at any given time. This probably means being light on their feet in terms of revelations so they have the most favourable news cycle. It probably also means breaking down information into smaller chunks so they can get attention multiple times. In the case of the original Switch, they had the pre-announcement of the NX console, the confirmation that Breath of the Wild would be on the new system, the launch trailer for the Switch, which teased new 3D Mario and demonstrated versions of Mario Kart and Splatoon, although at that point it was not clear that the Splatoon game would be a full sequel, and then they had the January launch reveal to flesh out the details of the system and to showcase a bunch of new games, including announcements of the first-party offerings 1-2 Switch, ARMS, Fire Emblem Warriors, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Several different releases at different times, and several different opportunities for Nintendo to command attention. Having said that, this approach was perhaps specific to the launch of the Nintendo Switch. In that case, we were looking at replacing a console which, in terms of sales and public perception, had clearly failed. I'm talking about, of course, the Wii U, and the hype cycle here was crossing a holiday season, and of course Nintendo had a second string to their bow in the 3DS, which was still going quite strongly with a major new Pokemon title releasing in holiday 2016. That's not necessarily the situation with the Switch 2. There is an argument to be made that compressing your hype cycle down as short as possible to a short time frame minimizes that disruptive period between announcement and the new system release, where the sales of your current console might dip. In this case, rather than lots of small noises, making one massive noise all at once could be effective. This is particularly true if Nintendo are concerned at even the slightest whiff of a narrative of anticlimax. If they release a trailer for the new Switch 2 and it is either experimental in a way that puzzles consumers or quite iterative in a way that makes the general public go, "Hey, that's great, I have one just like it at home," then they risk stumbling right out of the gate. In the case of the original Switch, expectations were so low that the first Switch trailer didn't necessarily need to do excessively well to start with, as it was just the very beginning of their sales pitch. Also, frankly, the concept of the Switch was more compelling than just about any console Nintendo has released since the Nintendo 64. Double-screen gameplay, 3D, motion controls, all of these needed some careful selling, so the audience got their heads around the value proposition, but being able to have home quality console gaming on the go and to seamlessly switch between modes, well, that even at the time felt to me like a complete slam dunk. If the console's concept isn't quite as strong, whether because it requires more narration to explain it or because it's fairly iterative in nature, then Nintendo will need to mainline not the console concept itself, but the game's lineup alongside. And in this case, having a fuller fat reveal out of the gate would make a lot of sense. Obviously, the best venue for such a reveal would therefore be a full Nintendo Direct. This would be the most glorious proposition for all, for fans, and it would guarantee absolutely huge numbers of eyeballs, as so many people tune into Directs anyway, let alone ones that contain much hyped new consoles. In terms of real estate for any third party wanting to advertise their wares, that Nintendo Direct would be a huge opportunity, and there is precedent for Nintendo using the Direct format for console revelations. The Switch Lite was revealed this way, as were multiple models of the 3DS. Then again, the Switch OLED edition, the 2DS XL, and the classic Switch were revealed through video drops alongside press releases. Now, it's true that in days gone by, Nintendo would reveal information about a system without revealing very much at all. The 3DS announcement was just a bare-bones bit of text, and game revelations waited until the following E3. As for the Wii U, they first showcased the concept in 2011's E3 presentation, but neglected to feature any actual games. This made sense in retrospect, partly because it was over a year away from release, but also because, as we ultimately found out, the Wii U didn't exactly have a deep bench of hype bomb games for its launch period, which was part of the problem that the system faced. We would hope, and I think can expect, that the Switch successor will have a much fuller games library in the first year or so. Also, the Wii U reveal was pretty much a textbook case of how not to reveal a console from day one, with Nintendo stock taking a 10% dip there and then. In a word, oops. Basically, I think we can rule out either the Wii U or the 3DS as models for how to unveil a new console to the world. Therefore, it feels to me likely that they will want not just a text release, but some kind of video to explain the new system, and the question ultimately, therefore, is only about length. Are we looking at a full featured direct presentation, even if it doesn't bear the hallowed direct moniker, or a quick and viral trailer drop? The advantages of the short advertisement in the era of social media are many. Even modern directs are designed in a modular nature, where Nintendo can parcel the direct out into shorter advertisements of usually around 2 to 3 minutes for their bigger revelations. Even the Switch Lite revelation took the form of an embedded advertisement, and this kind of thing is going to be a boon for social media, where attention spans are notoriously short, except of course for the wise and fabulous kinds of people who watch Nintendo forecast videos, that is. I think we can say with a 90% certainty that there will be some kind of discrete launch trailer that can be parceled out and dropped into social media channels therefore, but the hard call is how to package this, or of course, whether to package it at all. After all, they could drop this out of the blue onto YouTube and watch with mounting glee as the word spreads. But by doing this, they are essentially ceding control of their messaging, because many of their core audience will find out about the machine first through headlines and hashtags before they hear it straight from the horse's mouth. And while one would hope that it would be a positive framing, there is always the risk that there's a Wii U style negative response, in which case many people's first impression of the new console will be some gobby ex-user going unexpectedly viral for bemoaning that the console isn't even as powerful as the PS5 Pro. One thing that has been somewhat surprising to me is the dearth of announcements of games of scale for the coming year, and these are reveals I would expect if the plan is a smaller, discrete console announcement. After all, the original Switch trailer focused on 4 first-party games, but 1 was Breath of the Wild, which had already been pre-announced for the system, 2 were titles that had editions recently released on the Wii U, and only 1, Super Mario Odyssey, was brand new. Of course, there were third-party games showcased as well, such as Skyrim, but these weren't exclusives either. However, the only title which feels like it could fit into a next-gen lineup that we currently have gameplay footage for is Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. And while I love me some Metroid, I'm not convinced that Samus alone is going to be the kind of gargantuan system seller that her legions of fans would wish her to be. When Switch OLED was revealed on the 6th of July 2021, it was able to showcase a bunch of new big-hitter games. Splatoon 3 had been revealed the previous February, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom had been showcased, if not yet named, the previous June, as had Metroid Dread. Splatoon and Metroid were particularly important because they could be used to showcase aspects of the system, specifically the OLED's ability to show much crisper blacks in those dark, claustrophobic tunnels that Samus inevitably seems to find herself running through, and the improved facilities for online play were demonstrated through Splatoon. Showcasing Zelda might not have been strictly necessary to sell the console, but it was a much hyped game and made sense to show in this context. Basically, Nintendo had laid down groundwork before the reveal in both the cases of the Nintendo Switch and of the Nintendo Switch OLED. The same is also true, of course, for the Switch Lite model, where a groundwork of games that fitted a handheld model particularly well had already been set down. These included games which thrived, particularly on the 3DS, such as Luigi's Mansion and Animal Crossing, and of course a top-down Zelda that was a remake of one of the greatest and most beloved handheld titles of all time. Now, Shuntaro Furukawa has already confirmed that they will be revealing more about the new system this financial year, so it's certainly possible they could start to trail games in advance before even releasing the console. If they do an October or November Direct, they could showcase, let's say, the next Mario Kart, and then they could do a Direct in January or February showcasing perhaps a new Monolith Soft title and tease a 3D Mario. The Pokemon Company could also give us an early look at Pokemon Legends ZA, which may, for all we know, have cross-gen potential, although given that the Pokemon Company have never exactly been vanguards for excellent graphics and performance, I'm a little dubious that Nintendo would want ZA to have too much focus in their next console launch. But if they had this drumbeat of pre-announcements, then if they dropped the reveal trailer for the new system a couple of weeks later, they could always show off a bunch of new games, but the focus of the first trailer would be on the new system. It's also an effective way to build up a hype cycle by showing some games ahead of time. Effectively, what happened in 2016 with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The thing is though, there's no sign that Nintendo are currently doing this. If we count back from the July reveal of the OLED model, we can say that the build-up in terms of games started 5 months prior, with Splatoon 3 being announced, and we're now barely more than 5 months before the last potential date that Nintendo can announce more about their new system, according to Shuntaro Furukawa's previous promise. I also don't think Nintendo will want to ride out the clock right to the end, as it just narrows down their leeway in terms of reveal flexibility, so I would expect a revelation at the latest before the investors meeting in February 2025. And while I don't think Nintendo is overly concerned about damaging console sales in 2024, since everybody knows there will be a Switch successor console, and those who are keenest to purchase the new console probably already have a Switch, I do think game sales is a concern to them. It doesn't seem the most sensible strategy to spike the twin launches of Super Mario Party Jamboree and Mario & Luigi Brothership by announcing a massive new Mario Kart right on top of them. I mean, it could work. Perhaps the extra hype around Mario would make people feel in the mood for a Mario fix and could give the games an extra sales fillip. But Nintendo usually like to give their games at least a little time in the sun. They gave New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe a few weeks before shouting about Super Mario Maker 2. They waited until Paper Mario the Origami King had been and gone before dropping these Super Mario 35th Anniversary titles, and they let Pokemon Legends Arceus have one day short of a whole month before blowing it out of the water with the reveal of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. In the scheme of things, I don't think it's that big a problem. Holiday seasons and Mario games always go together, but if you're going to launch a new system early the following year, you're just going to have to accept the hit and make the revelation. But if they're not releasing early in the next year, then they do have a lot more flexibility and may consider it wise to steer clear. After all, if they're revealing a new console, it's difficult to imagine that they could avoid showcasing the fact that it has Mario titles, but on the other hand, perhaps they can de-emphasize these as far as possible. Think about it, we knew the Switch had Splatoon, Mario Kart and 3D Mario, but we had very little idea as to the specifics of those games, and the spotlight was firmly on the system itself. It's also possible that they could leverage Jamboree itself, which seems to be a very big title by the standards of Mario Party games and is clearly intended to make a big impact. Partly, that's because Nintendo needs something big for its holiday window, but it could also make a good crossover title for the new system, especially if there's some clever way of interfacing between the new system and the classic Switch, allowing for crossplay. The default assumption probably has to be a replication of the original Switch, the 2DS XL, and the Switch OLED approach, where they led with a system-first shorter trailer, but I can't shake the feeling that Nintendo may need a little bit more explanation for their next console, either because it's highly iterative and so they will need a strong library of games to bolster the initial appeal to anyone who needs more to recommend a console than just being technologically beefier, or because it has strong original features which may be better demonstrated in terms of a strong lineup of games. And there's another consideration that they will want to lay out. They do not want the new system to totally eclipse the existing Switch console. That system has a huge install base and will be vital for Nintendo's finances over the next year or so as a way to smooth over their financial situation while the new console's install base is building up. And again, Nintendo hasn't made any obvious effort to shore up the Nintendo Switch long term. Think back to September 2016's 3DS Focus Direct, which was absolutely jam-packed with first-party 3DS titles. Pokemon Sun and Moon, Super Mario Maker 3DS, Mario Party Star Rush, Hyrule Warriors Legends, updates for New Leaf, Rhythm Paradise Megamix, Dragon Quest VII, which Nintendo are publishing themselves, plus Picross 3D, Street Pass Me Plaza, Tank Troopers, Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, Ever Oasis, Mario Sports Superstars, and Hey Pikmin. And that's not including reveals linked to the 30th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda, such as Zelda Amiibo, and showcasing the NES Classic Mini Edition. This was an absolute beast of a Direct, so full of content designed to say that, irrespective of anything else that was happening on the market, the 3DS is going to stay around and have a massive amount of support going forward. Should we expect a similar final Nintendo Switch Direct which sets out a suite of small but significant titles stretching out into the future to show that, irrespective of the new technology, the Switch is still worth investing in? Now, the stakes were a lot higher back in 2016. Indeed, if the Switch failed and Nintendo didn't keep the 3DS at least on life support, Nintendo's console line would probably have reached near existential problems, and the likelihood of some kind of forward compatibility also de-escalates the risk of the new system. At the very least, there has to be a 90% chance that there is at least one cross-platform Pokemon game, and I think there's a 70% chance that Gen 10 Pokemon will also be playable on the classic Switch as well as the new model, given that the Pokemon Company love huge existing install bases. This would allow them to do a transition closer to the Wii, where first-party games on the Wii simply stopped dead before the Wii U launched. Kirby's Dream Collection in July of 2012 was the last first-party release before all focus moved to the new hardware. Also, if Nintendo are planning to do a massive push on Switch's future, the window for such a revelation is rapidly closing, given that we are now in the quarter where the most consoles will be shifted. This makes it all the more important to be able to explain very clearly how Switch will be supported alongside the Switch 2, which would probably, I guess, be simply by having trailers confirming releases on both Switch and Successor hardware. All of this makes me wonder whether a reveal Direct may be more optimal for Nintendo than a one-off ad drop. They have precedent with focus directs for films, theme parks, anniversaries, the museum, and so having a full-on Direct, or at least a presentation of significant length that it counts as the same, even if it's not under the Direct branding, does make sense to me. Of course, a 1-2 punch of a trailer and then a Direct would also make sense. In 2016 and 2017, they let this 1-2 punch take place over a holiday period. The trailer went out on the 20th of October, and the live presentation was streamed about 12 weeks later on the 13th of January. But there is no particular reason why they need this long an interval, and it's probably far less beneficial for them to give the system the option of publicity without a supporting lineup of games now compared to when it was in 2016, where expectations from the general public of Nintendo after the Wii U were at challenger depth lows. Still, Nintendo's history is that they tend to reveal hardware after Directs rather than before. 2DS XL followed the March 2017 Direct, and the Switch OLED followed E3. It's just that neither of those really needed a suite of games alongside it. When we think about the factors that propelled the original Switch to the big leagues, yes, it had a great concept, and yes, it had a terrific form factor. The price was decent, although some people worried at the time it was on the high side, and the advertising was exceptionally strong, but also it just had amazing games. Zelda Breath of the Wild in itself was a system seller. Mario Kart 8 was the Wii U's strongest title. Splatoon had been the Wii U's biggest breakout hit in terms of original first-party games, so a sequel was always likely to grab attention, especially in Japan. Super Mario Odyssey was the most ambitious-looking 3D Mario in years. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was a hugely anticipated sequel to one of the most acclaimed RPGs of all time, while the year also had other fairly significant titles like Fire Emblem Warriors, Pokken Tournament DX, Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle, ARMS, and Snipperclips, and almost all these titles were announced before the Switch even hit the shelves, save only Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle and Pokken Tournament DX. Now, I think Nintendo can be a little more circumspect with their Revelations schedule this time out, because the hype going in is that much higher, but I still think Nintendo are going to want the impression of having a huge number of games, And what better way to achieve this than starting with a massive Nintendo Direct showing that yes, this next generation will certainly have games, and big AAA ones at that. So look, in terms of forecasting, there's really no way I would think to disaggregate the likelihood of any of these possibilities because there are so many different considerations, and Nintendo ultimately will want an element of surprise. It also very much depends on when they plan to launch, since the later they leave it, the more of a push they may need to give, but it does depend to a large degree on how much they already have in train organisationally. After all, once they gear up for production, the leeway for changing their release schedule rapidly diminishes because there are just so many moving parts to consider. At this point, I think mounting the launch trailer into a broader direct feels to me at least a 30% chance, given the need to focus on games and the relatively low chances that any new console will be able to communicate its unique charms with the same kind of crystal clarity as the original Nintendo Switch. I do think the chances of a full direct will rise the longer we go without a reveal though, and it will depend to a large extent on the games Nintendo have to offer, so this video on Nintendo's early game releases might be of interest to you. Thank you for watching, thanks especially to my patrons, and I hope to see you soon in the comment section. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you again soon for another Nintendo Forecast.